Yes, the Trump administration delivering its own verdict for New Yorkers and those thinking about traveling there. A halt order on congestion pricing. Although for now it continues as the MTA is appealing the decision. Joining us now to discuss from the American Institute of Economic Research, David Hebert's here alongside the president of the National Taxpayers Union, Pete Sepp. So gentlemen, welcome and thanks for coming on today. New York Governor Kathy Hochul is now in a back and forth against Trump, and she says she's going to take this to the courts. But David, could you talk to us about the financial implications of ending this congestion fee?
Sure. So $9 per driver coming into certain parts of Manhattan would raise significant revenue for the city, and it would ease some of the traffic burdens in that city for example, first responders and other emergency vehicles to make it around the city, and especially in areas that are plagued by the necessity for these vehicles to get, access to them. And so there is a case to be made for having these congestion prices, and it is at some level New York City's choice. Now, whether the president has the authority to step in and cancel it is difficult for me to see. We do see, evidence of this. So Ronald Reagan famously withheld some funding for federal highway systems for states that did not raise the drinking age to 21. But he only withheld 5%, not the full amount. So it's going to be an interesting legal battle to see who comes out on top. Does the president have the power to focus his efforts on New York City, or should he be focusing on issues that plague the entire country rather than just parts of Manhattan?
Well, that's a good point. And Pete, I'll go to you on that because it has been talked about. They've been considering congestion pricing in other large cities as well. This is the first in the nation here in New York City for them to do that. Do you see that happening in other cities, or is this going to last just temporary, and that would be it?
Other cities around the world have adopted congestion pricing, right. And New York has made a lot of mistakes by not learning from those cities' policies. You take Stockholm, Sweden, for example. The goal there was not to start out trying to raise a lot of revenue for mass transit like New York's plan. The goal was to actually reduce congestion. They worked it out from there. They said, well, we're going to have a pilot plan. We're going to keep the prices adjustable. We're not going to have congestion pricing 24 hours a day like New York was proposing. And we're going to have an ongoing referendum with commuters and voters as to how they felt it was working out. New York did none of that, and now they're suffering for it with a bad plan. We need to go back to the drawing board because, congestion pricing can be a good workable thing in big cities, but you got to do it right.
Yeah, great point. And it almost seemed like the Transportation Secretary's letter was kind of that, open to negotiating some changes to the congestion pricing, considering it's going to go up over the years. So maybe get ahead of that. But President Trump coming in and saying it's over. We'll watch as the courts challenge that, and we'll be discussing that later on in the show. In the meantime, we talked about the idea of DOGE rebates yesterday. And now President Trump is weighing in, saying DOGE could return 20% of its savings directly to taxpayers. So, David, what do you think about this idea? What kind of impact could it have?
So the numbers I'm coming up with are somewhere around $2,000 to $3,000 per taxpayer if we were to allocate 20% of DOGE's savings to taxpayers. Now, look, I'm of this radical opinion that every penny that I and other Americans earn is ours, and that we have an obligation to remit some of that money to Congress and the federal government in order to promote, as Oliver Wendell Holmes once said, a more civilized society. But if those funds are not being used to promote that civilized society, if they're being used for political ends, then that money needs to be returned because it has been unjustly expropriated from the American taxpayers, not remitted to benefit all of America.
Yeah, Pete, your thoughts on that as well as reducing the deficit. Remember, that is one of the big points of this, too, getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, which is the theme of DOGE, if you will, of taking that money and then hearing the president say, well, maybe we'll take 20% of that and return it to the American taxpayers, but also take the other amount and reduce the deficit, which is needed.
Yeah, reducing the deficit is vital because deficits and debt incurred by the federal government are nothing more than tax increases on a future generation. So we got to pay attention to that. We also have to make sure that the savings are properly calculated so we know exactly how much money we're dealing with. The important thing here is the incentives that a DOGE refund would create. Right now, special interests have a very, very big stake in preserving federal spending programs, but the general taxpayer doesn't because they don't have a stake in any single federal initiative the way special interests do. DOGE refunds could kind of turn the tables there, and the average taxpayer would say, yeah, I now have an interest in getting directly back some of my money. And I think that would be a healthy thing for our fiscal policy.
Yeah, not only that, but it sounds pretty popular.
And still you have people very critical of Elon Musk, of DOGE, and then you have this hanging in the balance here that maybe you actually might get some of that money back.
Either way, we'll wait and see. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us, David Hebert and Pete Sepp. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Long live